Hello, hello, hello. Good afternoon. Welcome to another live podcast episode, The Black Mind Garden. It's been a minute. It's been a minute since I've been on live and done a live episode, and we are in season 4 now, and so I'm excited to bring different topics, bring some more guests on this season, and today I really wanted to talk a little bit about understanding how important it is as we think about um, creating psychological safety and thinking about becoming trauma informed, understanding how we represent language, understanding how the brain works. And I know I talk about this a lot, um, but I have been doing more work inside of this realm of creating psychological safety. That's one of the areas of passion, one of the areas of specialty in trauma informed communication. And so, as I go into these organizations, I teach, I coach these executives and train. It's what I'm finding more and more is that foundationally, when we understand how our brain processes and when we understand the various ways that we represent language, we can begin to understand the root of misunderstandings. And so I just got through, and if you're following me on any of these platforms, you know that we just completed a one of our trauma informed NLP coach trainings and NLP communication certifications. And the foundation of what people recognize is how when when you are speaking to a person, you are representing language one way, and when they are listening, they may be representing a language another way. So let's talk about it. Um, the main ways that when we obviously when people are talking to us, we actually think primarily in pictures, right? So if you think about the way people communicated back in the day, I'll say back in the day, there were a lot of symbols and pictures, pictographs that we've uncovered, and that's the way the brain thinks. Now, it's only later did the we encode what we do is we think in pictures and we encode that into language. We encode that into the words that we speak. Now, what's interesting about that is that everyone's representation or model of the world or model of a particular word or the meaning of a word is different based on their history, based on their memories and past experiences, based on their own filters. And so one could say, when you say the word love, or when you say the word good job, the phrase good job, or when you say come here, and that has a specific cadence, the representation, the image that you might be thinking of what's about to happen when you speak words like love, or when you speak phrases like come here, when you say things like great job or this needs work, the representation in your head will be different from how the image that shows up in the person who receives the message. And why that's important to understand is because, sometimes how when we're speaking to people and we get reactions or responses that we are not intending, and we don't understand why, it's because people represent language differently based on their own filters. So we represent language primarily in three different ways. Primarily, we're visual people, or we could be primary auditory people. We could be primary kinesthetic people, and kinesthetic is just another word for like feeling and sensation and walking through things. And when we understand what that primary modality is that we are drawn towards, you will notice that you use words that are aligned with that. So if you're primarily visual and you learn primarily in a visual manner, and when you are speaking to people and people are speaking to you about a project or something that you're trying to sell you, that you need to see it before you can process it. Like visual is the primary way that you process. This is the primary way that you represent your language. But then there's someone else who their learning language is auditory, or their learning language is kinesthetic, and they have to walk through things. They have to walk through things, and in order to learn, in order to process, they may need a little bit longer. If you're not on the same page with how you're primarily, your primary modality of learning, or your primary modality of processing, then a misunderstanding can occur. And also, you could be trying to force someone to understand or to do things in a way that you do them, when maybe that's not the primary way that they process. So why is that important? I mean, that can be important on various levels. We could talk from an organizational level, but then in the home, we could talk about our kids, and how that impacts them. So I'll start with the individual, and then I'll chunk it up to the organization. From a um, individual level, when you think about, especially as a parent, I'm going to speak, I always speak about my son, and I speak about us as parents. From a parent perspective, when you have like a child who is a primary visual, that's how they learn. Then in the school, inside of the classroom, inside of the school system, inside of the classroom, that actually may be useful for them, because how are things taught primarily in the classroom? Visual and auditory. So when you have kids who are visual and auditory, then yes, that may benefit the kids. But if you have someone who is a primary kinesthetic learner, meaning they need to walk through, they need to do, they need to be active, they need to be, that's the way they process, that's the way they learn. That sit down all day, absorb, for someone talking to you and writing things on the board may not be enough. So that's at the individual level, and it's very useful to be watching your kid, to be um, like listening to, their feedback from the classroom, and really helping them to understand how they best learn, and having these conversations with the educators, and with their teachers and their educators in their room, to be able to empower them on that level. So now you can map that on to self as well. You can apply to self. How do you primarily learn? How do you primarily process information? You can also map that on to people in your organization. When you have someone in the organization that may be struggling, with directions, or with projects, how do they primarily process the directions that you're giving them? Do they primarily, are they visual people? Do they need to see it and read it? If you just tell them something but you don't show them anything, guess what? They may struggle to retain that information, because that's not the way, their primary way of processing. Why is this important? Is because when we talk about team functionality, and we talk about really being on the same page in communication, knowing yourself and being able to communicate that to the people around you, or also being able to even listen for, and that's one of the things we teach in our trainings, is how do you listen? How do you know? I mean, it seems very complicated, right? It seems complicated to be like, all right, well, some people are visual, some people are auditory, some people are kinesthetic. How do I listen to a person and know what what they are, so that I can best empower them in in the team environment? And that's just one way, that's one level of understanding. And a lot of times it is the listening. It is the listening. And also, when you learn and you empower people to learn, and you sometimes you can just ask. Many people surprisingly know when they learn best, or how they learn best. And if they don't know, you can ask, well, can you think of a time when you learned something, and you learned something well? And most people can think of a specific time when they've learned something, and they've learned something well. And the question to ask is, well, what did you do so that you knew that you learned it well? And they'll tell you, and then okay, this is primarily how a person processes and how they learn. And when you speak to them, you can begin to translate in a way, and speak to them in a way that they can hear you. This is very important in the team dynamic, because when you're speaking in the team, especially when you're speaking in the team dynamic, when you're speaking in meetings, when you're speaking in boardrooms, when you're speaking with executives, knowing that if you hit in your speaking, the visual and the auditory and the kinesthetic processing modalities that you're going, everyone in the room is going to process that what you're saying. And then of course you can always ask someone to repeat back to you, what do you think that what are you hearing that I'm saying? Let me get some feedback. And that's how you know your language is landing. But this all comes from understanding that we represent language differently, not only from the fact that each word that we speak shows up in our mind as an image differently from the words that other people speak, and are different from the images that show up in another person's mind with that same word, like understanding that, so that when there's a misunderstanding you can simply ask, what did you hear me say? How did that land for you? Very simple questions to stay on the same page. And what it does is it opens the conversation. And when you open the conversation, then you're more likely to get resolution with misunderstanding and avoid total conflict. But even in conflict, most times it's a misrepresentation of language, you know. And of course, there are, definite exceptions to that rule. But when we understand that everyone represents language differently in their mind, everyone has different processing and learning styles, and it looks different on everyone, and we start to be sensitive to that, then that is when and also again, our traumas inform all of these things. They inform how, some of the processing, or they inform some of the images that show up in our brain when certain words or phrases or tones of voices are used. So when we begin to understand that, then when we see responses and reactions, we actually can look at them with a different lens. We can look at them with a different lens. And that is sort of the beginnings of the foundations of beginning to be trauma aware and trauma sensitive. Being trauma informed is a that's a continued education. Being trauma responsive is a continued practice. So, once we are trauma informed and trauma responsive, these are the ways that we can begin to like implement actions and policies that create psychological safety, and really to be able to assess where the safety is in your organization and where it is not. So that's really, the message that I wanted to bring today is to I invite you to really look and listen, not look and listen, but listen to language this week, and listen to how different people are speaking. What are the primary representations of words? They're using a lot of words that represent visual. Are they using a lot of words that represent sound? Are they using a lot of words that represent walking through, or grasping, or kinesthetic? And I invite you to ask someone at work today, how do you best learn? And ask your child, if you have a child, if you are a parent or a caretaker, ask your young person, how do you think you best learn? Do you learn more by watching or seeing? Do you learn more by listening, or do you learn more by walking through? And I'd love for you to share those responses with me. All right. So as you know, uh, this is the world that I live in. This is the world that I teach. I teach it in organizations, and I do certifications. And so if you want to know more, if you're in an organization and you want to engage more in conversation around how do we create psychological safety, how do we assess that, how do we learn trauma informed communication in our organization so that we can improve our engagement, retain our talent, recruit diverse talent, then you can reach out to me. Websites below. You can reach out directly to me, message me on whatever platform you are on. As you know, I do also have a trauma informed communication course, and it's right on the website, mindremappingacademy.com. You can learn a little bit more, download the overview of that as well. And if you're interested in the certification, again, you can reach out to me directly by email, drmaisha@drmaisha.com, or you can go right to mindremappingacademy.com and fill out an application. So I'll be back on my regular weekly lives, and I look forward to continue to expand these topics with you. You'll have a great rest of the day and a great rest of the week. Stay empowered.